Episode 238. Hi, I'm Scott Langdon, and this week on God and Autobiography, the podcast, Jerry has a conversation with our good friend Ray Silverman in the second installment of our new series, What's Your Spiritual Story? Dr. Silverman is a professor of religion at Bryn Athyn College in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, and has a deeply fascinating spiritual story that he graciously shares with all of us. Though raised in a devoutly atheist household, Ray never lost a connection with God, and his deep belief in love would eventually lead, as it did in a similar way for Jerry, to a newfound depth in his desire to know God and God's ways more clearly. Next week, Jerry and I return with an all-new edition of What's on Our Mind. I hope you enjoy the episode.
Well, I'd like to welcome Ray Silverman, who is one reader of the God book I have the pleasure of having met and learned his fascinating life story. Ray, it's good for you to be here. And as I remember, you can correct me if I'm misremembering, but your youth you described in a kind of Zorba the Greek way. You know, we all start out somewhere.
Yeah.
And where we start isn't where we journey to later. But you might just share your story, your spiritual journey, wherever you want to start.
Yeah, well, I don't know exactly where to begin. I think it began when I was a young boy growing up in Providence, Rhode Island. My father was a very zealous atheist.
Uh-oh.
He hated religion with a passion. And if he knew that I was praying to God under the covers where he couldn't see me, he'd be really, really mad.
Would have been upset, yeah.
So I kept that a secret from him, but I always believed in God. And I don't know why.
You don't know why.
I just believed that there was a God. And I would pray every night. And
it felt natural to you.
It came natural. And I have never doubted. It just that there's a God.
Yeah.
Even though I grew up in a staunchly atheistic family. When I met my wife,
yes,
I felt that God had brought us together.
Yes.
And that he would keep us together forever. But, you know, this was something that I had read in poetry.
Yes.
I was an English major in college and did my graduate work in English. And there's Elizabeth Barrett Browning. You know, I will love thee.
Yes.
How shall I
count the ways, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
I love thee to the length and depth and breadth my soul shall reach. And if God so choose, I will love thee better after death. So there it was.
Yes.
There's the singers like Johnny Mathis, I'll love you till the 12th of never. And, you know, it is it's right out there. You know, love will never end. Endless love.
Right.
In theology, especially in Christian theology, it seemed like Jesus said in the resurrection, they are neither married nor given in marriage, but shall be as the angels. So when I met my wife, I did believe God brought us together and he'd keep us together forever. And I thought, well, if it's not in the Bible, I'm going to have to write a book about this.
Okay, yes.
So my wife and I started our research, and I found a book in the library by Emanuel Swedenborg, a Christian theologian. And within the first couple of chapters, he's talking about eternal marriages, and he's interviewing these angels in heaven, a man and a woman who are called one angel, who have been married for thousands and thousands of years.
Yeah.
I said to my wife, we have found it. This is it.
Spoke to both of you.
Yeah.
Yes.
And one of Swedenborg's central premises, even though he's a Christian theologian and believes that God manifested in the world as Jesus Christ, Swedenborg in the 18th century was teaching that you can be saved in any religion. You can go to heaven in any religion. It just requires a belief in something higher than yourself, God, life according to the commandments. I love that. You know, it spoke to everything that I ever believed. I tried to bring this message to my father,
Uh-huh.
who would not accept it.
Right.
Well, I accepted it so much that I became a Swedenborgian minister.
Yes.
When I did that, that was like the nail in the coffin for my father. He disowned me. He didn't
Really?
speak to me for the rest of his life.
Well, that's painful.
That was painful, but
Painful.
I know that we'll meet in heaven and we'll have much to talk about.
Okay. All right. All right. Right.
That's a very condensed version of my story.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's amazing. And it's interesting how had the search for love, you skipped to falling in love with your wife.
Yeah.
For me, I have a story similar. As you know, the God book starts off with a love story.
Right. That's right. Yeah.
Starts off with falling in love with my wife.
Yeah.
And my not having not even believing in love.
Yeah.
For that, I believed in compatibility or something like that.
Yeah.
You put your two profiles side by side and see if you're compatible, common interest and whatever.
Yeah.
But there were many years before that, and so it was a long journey to find the right person. What was that journey like for you? Was it a wasteland?
Was it
or just the journey toward finding your wife?
Oh, well, my parents, for example, didn't talk to each other at all. And
So you didn't have a model of a
yeah.
marriage.
And it was like, Raymond, tell your mother, and Raymond, tell your father. So I was like the middle person. I was the youngest child. I was the last one in the family.
Yes.
They were still not talking. So I had this terrible sense of a marriage that didn't work. And part of my prayer was, dear God, help mommy and daddy become friends.
Of course.
Just help them become friends. Eventually they did become friends. That
good.
answered.
Good. That's very hard on the child.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I had relationships before I met my wife that, were so painful.
Really?
I never wanted to repeat those again.
Yes.
Met my wife. We were both determined to make this marriage work.
Yes.
Not repeat any of our prior relationships. And we knew somehow that the only way it would work is to put our lives in the hands of God, who would keep us growing together.
So you were, at the time you came across God and Autobiography, you were a Swedenborgian minister.
Right.
And I always tell friends that I discovered that, like, the Vatican of the Swedenborgians is right here in Bucks County, Pennsylvania. This is really, really one of the great centers.
Yeah.
Worldwide.
Except Swedenborg's not our pope.
Well, it's not a pope. You don't exactly have a pope, but he was, in addition to a great Christian-style thinker, and a thinker even larger than that, he had visions, right? He had visions.
He's another revelator, and that's why there was no problem for me to see you as part of that long line of revelators. God is never without a spokesperson, and who it'll be, we never know.
Right. It's it's an interesting question, because a lot of people think, as soon as God, you might say, finished writing the New Testament, he retired and moved to Florida. God just went silent at that point. Yeah. Except for, well, everybody knows if they have a life of prayer, or moments of where a sort of miracles seem to come into your life, or some special help. Well, God seems to be kind of active still. But as far as revelation, they always think just revelation stopped, and one understands why religion wants to close it off at some point.
Isn't that interesting? Yeah.
An institutional interest in that. And I assume Swedenborg had challenges as he comes along saying, well, I've got further word from the divine.
Right.
And we now have to put this further word into some kind of large picture.
Exactly right. In fact, this is one of the things that impressed me about the God book, that you're saying in the God book, or God is saying to you,
yes,
exactly what Swedenborg is reporting in case after case after case. Also, I love this idea that you just don't take it at face value. This was maybe what was given to the ancients. This was written in the Old Testament or even the New Testament, and everything has a much deeper meaning. And if you can get to the center and to the core, we come into much more of a oneness with one another. And so God is always trying to bring us more and more deeply into that core. The scripture that comes to mind is Jesus saying, I have many things to reveal to you, but you cannot bear those things now. And in the God book, God is telling you, Jerry, there's a lot of information that people were just not ready to receive. They received it only in the way that they could, but it'll be opened and clarified further in further generations of time according to their readiness. And that is totally what I believe, totally what Swedenborg teaches, and what totally makes sense.
Well, it makes sense. Of course, I had this experience. I don't know. I was unlike you. I'd never believed in God, didn't even have a lively God question. It was not of interest to me. I had a worldview worked out, and it had its own nobility, you might say. Mm-hmm. And so I was doing fine. And until God spoke to me, and then I thought, oh, my philosophy was wrong. It's like new data here comes in. There's a God who can actually not just preside over the universe as some abstract being, but can actually talk to people and show an interest in their lives. That was the kind of God who spoke to me, who's very interested in Jerry's life and Ray's life and the life of each and every person. And, it's a very different vision. So, but it did mean that I had a lot of questions and a kind of skepticism. So I'm always sort of pushing with question. And sometimes I'm told, Ray, just the way you just formulated it, I would ask a question and I was told, Jerry, you're not ready yet. You would not understand it if I told you, in effect. You're not ready yet to hear about that.
Right.
Has the God book affected you in any way since reading it?
I think so. I think that's a good question. Well, let me back up a little. One of the things in the God book that I really love is why God picked you.
Yes.
And he said, I picked you because you're an ordinary, nice guy. You're not a crank.
Right, that's right.
You're a distinguished professor of philosophy. You're a director of the National Endowment for the Humanities.
Yeah.
You would not be considered, one of those people who's hearing voices.
Right.
I hadn't read that yet, but when I met you at the American Academy of Religion and you were seeing Theology Without Walls, and you began to speak, I thought, here's a real nice person.
Okay, good.
Here's a person who has not been affected by what I'll call academic snobbery.
Oh, right. It's valuable for me that after my years of full-time academic work, I spent some time, I was running a higher ed organization when I met my wife. I did some things in Washington. I was a congressional fellow. And so it was very helpful to get out of that academic cocoon. Mm-hmm. Everyone's sitting around thinking we're the smartest people in the world. Mm-hmm. And you meet other people in other walks of life and you discover, well, they may not be sort of theoretically smart in the sense that they can talk about Aristotle and Plato and this and nuclear physics, but they have lots of smarts and even more important, in their area of life. And even more important, they often have a lot of life wisdom.
Yeah.
Which a lot of professors are deficient in.
Yeah.
I would meet people who were, I just thought these people have really thought about life and what they're doing and have come up with sound answers.
Right.
And isn't that sort of what it's about, is that search for sound answers to life's questions.
It's true.
But anyway, I was, I did wonder why me, because I thought, wouldn't you want, someone who was a believer for openers?
Yeah.
But maybe in our age, it was useful if God's going to talk to somebody, better talk to an agnostic who has questions.
Yeah.
Because this is where most people are in that boat, even if they're sort of believers, they're in the middle of a culture that's a culture of unbelief. The public culture is a culture of unbelief.
This fall, I've been invited to speak at the Parliament of World Religions.
Wonderful.
And I'm on a panel that's called Spiritual But Not Religious.
Okay, yes.
And so what I am planning to say at some point, I'd like to introduce it in a way that's not confrontative or not in any way disparages anybody's sense of spirituality.
Right.
Quote Swedenborg, who says, spiritual life is acquired solely by a life according to the commandments in God's word.
Uh-huh.
And that is not what people usually have in mind when they say, I'm spiritual.
No, it is. It's usually a oozy-woozy kind of thing.
Right. In fact, when someone says, well, I'm trying to live my life according to God's commandments, that sounds religious.
Yeah, that sounds like what they rejected.
Yeah, and Swedenborg saying, no, that's what's spiritual. It's upside down for so many people. But my discovery has been, as you say in the God book, that God gave us the commandments, the ethical and moral laws of life for a reason. He also gave us Hinduism and discovering of the Atman and the inner life for a reason.
Yes.
These do not compete with each other. They're all various ways of looking at the truth. So the God book supports, sustains, and clarifies that in a beautiful way. So what I'd like to say to you, and maybe if this gets broadcast to others, is when I discovered Swedenborg's explanation of how the Lord really intends for two people to stay together forever, and then he explains it in depth.
Yes.
It confirms something that I believe in my heart of hearts. And in the God book, when you write about how there's God giving a certain revelation to the people of Eastern religions,
yes,
another religion, another kind of revelation to people of a more Western orientation.
Yeah.
Don't compete with each other. These don't even contradict each other, but they augment and complement each other in the most beautiful way. And this is the time for that. So when you say that in the God book, it confirms something that I believe in my heart of hearts. So one of the functions of the God book is to let people know these little intuitions you've had are real.
Yes, that's right. And the journeys are real journeys, even though they're in different cultures with different vocabularies, different rituals, even different philosophical, whole philosophical systems.
Right.
They're valid roots to the divine. And of course, the striking thing in the God book is that the divine, the ultimate divine reality is itself multifaceted.
Yeah.
And different cultures, you relate the Atman relates to the Brahman. Well, that's one aspect of divinity, and that isn't achieved by some other relation.
Right.
By the people of Israel forming a covenant and so forth. That's another relation to divinity.
Right. That's right.
And I guess extrapolating from that, I came to appreciate, down to the individual. There's probably a destiny for Ray and for Ray's wife, and so for each person. Yeah. And it might be to join this or that religion. Since all the good ones, they're not all necessarily good. There's no blanket endorsement in the God book, but all the ones you usually think of as major religions do have in them elements that are, might say, give you direct access to what's ultimate in reality.
Right.
And that's a wonderful vision. Jesus plays a huge role, as you know, because I also had an encounter with Jesus, and it is revisited at the end. But that never negates or nullifies the other religions and the kind of access they give you to the divine and the aspects of the divine that they help actualize, that help manifest in the world in which we live. But your notion of commandments, what struck me, I know when we first met at a conference, we sort of exchanged books of some kind, and you gave me your book on 10 Commandments, which is a teaching tool as well as an interesting read.
Right.
And I think you're quite right, Ray. Especially the younger generation do not like authoritarianism.
Right.
They don't want to be told, this is a set of rules. You come in this building, you sign up for a set of rules. We're going to boss you around, tell you how to live, and mainly condemn you for living the wrong way in this. But it seems to me you teach right out of the 10 Commandments, right out of the text, and yet it seems that your view is an open and expansive way of using the 10 Commandments. Does that sound right to you as a characterization of?
I love how you said that. I wish I could quote that and put that on the back of the book.
Well, we'll have to do that sometime.
Exactly. Oh, by the way, I've got the new cover.
Rise Above It, Spiritual Development for College Students, Ray and Star Silverman. And what's great about it, I think, is exactly what young people want. They don't want rules as if they were, in the military code of justice or something, how you've got to behave. They want something that they want people to speak out of their experience.
Exactly right.
I tried the drug lifestyle, and here's what it led to. And in my experience, it wasn't a winner.
Yeah.
It did not bring me happiness. It brought me a temporary semblance of happiness, and then the opposite. And so on. You go through the different areas of life, and you do that with the students by having them write journals or something. So they're thinking about the commandments, which you interpret very expansively. So idle can be, have no other gods before me, and you ask the students, well, what other gods are there in your life? What are the idols, in effect, that you're worshiping? And people start thinking about all kinds of things that are going on. It can be sex, it can be careerism, it can be popularity. I want to be popular. I want to one-up the other person. It can be all these. And you said often it's procrastination, which is a surprising answer to me. Many of them say, I procrastinate everything. And that's a kind of idol for me. I'm sort of living for procrastination,
So, we do a brainstorming early in the course of,
yes.
what things stand in the way of their being their best self.
Yeah.
That's a nice way of getting to, you shall have no other gods before you. Who do you want to be? What kind of a person do you want to be? They'll all say, I want to be patient. I want to be kind. I want to be generous. All those virtues. They already know that. Well, what stops you? What prevents it? Well, their anger, patience, lust, laziness. But the one that becomes number one for the past 18 years has been procrastination.
Amazing.
Yeah, and then, you could get within the procrastination to all the various branches and roots of that, maybe fear of failure, maybe just a real kind of lazy selfishness, all kinds of things. But procrastination is the umbrella that they mostly choose.
You've been teaching this course for many years, and therefore the book that you showed us, Rise Above It, is that the title?
Yeah.
Yeah, Rise Above It. Quotes from many of these student journals, because you've had quite a collection, and they're very real life and very moving. And we've all been there in some respect or other at some point in our lives of the very things these young people are going through. But I know you're also looking for opportunities to sort of spread this, and maybe train other people to do the same thing or to do it in different venues or something like that. What better than to start from the 10 Commandments, but to do it in this very open and personal way.
Yeah. You see, this is so nice of you, because I thought that this interview was going to be to help you promote the God book.
Right.
Or helping me promote my book, which is exactly what God wants.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, I'm often told, of course, I have to promote the God books. I feel a divine assignment to do that.
Yeah.
And what better way to promote it than to bring on wonderful readers like you?
Yeah.
So that's true. But in the end, what's the God book about? It's about each of us living a life in as close a connection as we can to divine purposes.
Yeah, you call it attunement, which is a very beautiful word.
Yes, and it's funny because I'm not a very musical person. Certainly have no talents myself, but musical images are often given me in the book. That the attunement is one point described. I think it might have been in the context of Taoism or something like that, but I don't think it's necessarily limited to that. But as almost like if you've ever seen, improv musicians who kind of, maybe it's jazz or maybe it's something else, but they're kind of playing around, picking up each other's themes, responding and chiming in. And so a lot of the sense is, well, you're kind of going with the flow, going with the harmony, and the harmony with other people, the harmony with divine purposes, because the road in your life is always taking twists and turns. So the divine purpose for you 5 years ago may not be the divine purpose for you tomorrow with a new set of challenges. So you kind of have to stay attuned, have to keep that connection.
It's true.
And I don't know if harmony isn't the only key, but that's one of them. And usually if you're doing the right thing, you also sometimes have to fight. I'm told that, you don't care about good and evil unless you fight for good and against evil, in those situations where it confronts you. But for normal life, you're looking for a high degree of harmony, being in sync with God and acting lovingly to other people. So as in your system, you look at your life, in one way, the whole life was a life about love, right?
Mm-hmm. That's right.
You need to find the right woman, and having found her, an awful lot flows out of that love.
Right, exactly. Like 7 children and 10
Yes. Yes, and the kind of teaching you do. And
yeah. So books came to mind while you were talking about jazz or improvisation. We tend to think of our life as a carefully plotted story, with a beginning, a middle, a rising action, climax, denouement.
Right. Sometimes stages.
Yeah, but it's not like that. And so I took a course once where one of the textbooks was called The Jazz of Leadership.
Okay.
And it was really about just being sensitive to everyone's moment where they take the lead.
Yes.
And another book I read a long time ago, you probably remember it, was The Celestine Prophecy.
Yeah, I never read it, but it was all over the place, a huge bestseller.
And one of the things that stuck out to me in the book was he talked about dialogue or conversation in a group. And he says, at any given moment, someone is supposed to speak.
Uh-huh.
I guess this is sort of like Quakerism, isn't it?
Yes.
The idea of being moved by the divine. But I use it in my classrooms as a teacher. I say, if you feel called to speak, I want you to speak. But notice you might be called to just be quiet and listen. And at a given moment, the person who's speaking is the person who should be speaking. And let's see if we can honor that. And it's been marvelous. But that's sort of like the jazz of leadership in the classroom. It's the way God orchestrates our life. I don't know why I bumped to that person today and why this happened. That kind of ongoing synchronicity is a real trust in the ongoing presence of God as our co-partner.
Yes, that's the way my life has changed. At first, someone asked, has this changed your life? And I actually first said, no, I'm kind of the same guy I was before. Mm-hmm. But then I started thinking in more minute ways, you might say, that I'm nicer in traffic than I was before.
Yeah.
But another way is I do look for the divine signals, so that what I would have dismissed as a coincidence, I now pause over.
Yeah.
I don't rush to connect them just because, everything's got to connect to everything. But I pause and think, is God sending me a signal? Putting this in my path? Is this somebody I'm meant to stop and help, for example? Or just other kinds of things like that. If I suddenly have a thought or an urge, I wonder, is this been sent to me, this idea.
Yeah. Well, that's a new way of thinking. In Christianity, that would be called being born again.
Yes.
You're not the old Jerry Martin. You're a new Jerry Martin. Everything is now filtered through the lens of, is this what God would like me to do?
Yes.
God would like me to say. And maybe the old Jerry Martin was a nice person who said, is this something kind to say? Should I, it's different. It's just different.
It is different. It is different.
And that whole thing about being born again, in Eastern thought, you could call that reincarnation. Now you have another chance.
Right. Start over.
Right. Yes, to start over. And I love that. Like sometimes my wife will remind me of something I did many, many years ago. And I can say, well, I'm not that way. That's not me. She'll say, no, Ray, that's not you. You're not that person anymore. And I love that.
Yes.
A chance to be a brand new person in this lifetime.
Yes. Yes.
That's called blowing out the flame of ego.
Yes.
That's nirvana. Yeah. Nir, to blow, vana out.
Uh-huh.
To extinguish the flame of self-will, and what flows in its place is being led by God.
Yes. Yes. And that's an amazing transformation.
Yeah. And so there it is. That's Eastern language to describe Christian born again, but it's all one thing.
Well, the Christian language is you go through a kind of death, right, to be born again.
The death of the old will,
old Adam or whatever,
the old man or the old and he's always been there, whether you were in your old man or not. But now the pipeline is cleared out.
Yes.
God's flowing and doing the work through you, and
Yes.
it feels like you.
Oh yeah, it's not that it's more you than before, because there was a lot of clutter that really wasn't you. It was acquired from your surroundings or propped up as a kind of Potemkin village self-image or something like that.
And it's all there in the God book, and it's only like about 350 pages.
It's all there. Yeah, this is.
It took Swedenborg 30 volumes.
30 volumes. Well, the original edition, the first draft was twice that length.
Oh, really? Yeah.
But I saw a lot of it were minor prayers and daily stuff, and even repetitive, because I often would be retracing ground, and got it down to whatever it is, 350 pages.
And even that, we're living in a bite-sized world with everything is little short messages on Snapchat or text, and for people to sit down and open a book and spend some time in contemplation, that's radical.
Yes, and I always feel, I don't know how you feel, Ray, that God and Autobiography is a book to be read slowly. Not to just sit down over the weekend. Some people I know have read it that way and felt they got a lot out of it. Yeah. But it seems to me it's a kind of book where you read a chapter and then mull it over. And maybe,
a lot to think about.
Let it steep.
Not just to think about, a lot to put into your life.
Yeah, and then that's the challenge that, in fact, I'm trying to think through more carefully how to make the God was more accessible in terms of life lessons. They're there, but they're sort of implicit, the way they tend to be implicit in most of scriptures of most of the traditions. But you need to have, what are the key quotes, for example, that would help guide life, and they're there. Right. And they guided my life, and just learning how to pray. I talked to one person, he's Jewish, and a learned man, classicist, knows the ancient languages. And how has this affected you? And he said, well, I pray differently. Yeah. Because before there was, these kind of ritualistic set prayers. And the style, of course, of the God book is dialogue. Right. And it's praying to a God who's listening. And it's personal and listening to you in particular. When Ray prays, God is listening to Ray. Yeah. And Ray has something to say, and God will send signals back.
Yeah.
in light of that. So that's one message, is to maybe reconceive how you're not relating to a religion, you're relating to God.
Oh, yeah, that's right. That's
Yeah.
very good. That's very good. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That whole idea that God is directly present for everyone,
Yes.
get to God through mediators, is very powerful. Very powerful.
Yes. And that's life transforming.
Yeah.
Yeah, that changes your life.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you, Ray. I think we're a little past our time, but it's time very well spent.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate your giving this time to me, I just find you a fascinating person with a fascinating life and wonderful God-inspired projects. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, and blessings to you, and blessings on the success and promulgation of the God Book.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for listening to God and Autobiography, the podcast. Subscribe for free today wherever you listen to your podcasts and hear a new episode every week. You can hear the complete dramatic adaptation of God and Autobiography as Told to a Philosopher by Jerry L. Martin by beginning with episode 1 of our podcast and listening through its conclusion with episode 44. You can read the original true story in the book from which this podcast is adapted, God and Autobiography as Told to a Philosopher, available now at Amazon.com and always at godandautobiography.com. Pick up your own copy today. If you have any questions about this or any other episode, please email us at questions@godandautobiography.com and experience the world from God's perspective, as it was told to a philosopher. This is Scott Langdon. I'll see you next time.